Welcome back for Stranger Things Have Happened Part 2, Women in Combat, A History Dismissed. The Pentagon recently announced that they are officially lifting the ban on women in combat. As I grew up, it was an ongoing controversy, despite the direction the rest of the world seemed to be taking, when countries like Israel have women fighting directly alongside the men. The thing about Israel, though, is it makes you think that this is a new or recent concept when it's actually not.
During Vietnam, women fought alongside the men in the VC and NVA. Going back further to the Soviet Union during World War II, women were used for specialty roles such as pilots, tank crew members, machine gunners, and snipers. Snipers were a popular role for women because they were argued to be the more patient of the sexes. Currently, women make up approximately 15% of the U.S. military. Of the 6,630 U.S. service members killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, 143 were female. Of the over 50,000 wounded in both theaters, over 600 were female. The point I aim to illustrate is that even if a particular job someone might have when deployed isn't technically a direct combat role, they can still end up getting shot at. As far as I can tell, this is one of the major rationales for the initiative. The women get shot at too, so the consequences of putting them further toward the line appear to be negligible.
I'm going to go on the record disclosing that I have never served a day of my life in uniform.
In which case, the farthest extent to which I can have a qualified opinion is in saying that based on the interviews I've read, male and female service members alike seem to have some mixed emotions. The biggest concern amongst them seemed to be if it would compromise the standards of the physical demands which could potentially endanger a unit as a whole. There was also the matter of risking that men and women would become romantically involved. It's true that the military tries to discourage relationships among troops when they're deployed because A, they don't want to deal with anyone getting pregnant, and B, they don't want relationship issues tampering with morale. Considering that gay and lesbian troops are now allowed to serve openly, is it impossible for a couple of gay guys to be serving in the same unit? Another concern expressed was that admitting women into direct combat will instigate further harassment and hostility from their male counterparts.
Unfortunately, it is true that the United States military has not historically been the friendliest environment for women, but even as someone who never served, I don't mind saying that as a man who doesn't sexually harass women, I find that notion offensive. Because to me, it suggests that men shouldn't be expected to conduct themselves appropriately around women, and logic like that could go on to argue that we probably shouldn't be trusted with firearms and explosives in the first place.
Even in contact with the enemy, there are regulations and ethics expected to be fulfilled, and for those who have failed to do so, consequences have been implemented. Are we really more concerned about our treatment of the enemy than we are of the people who devote their lives to fighting them? Especially when authorities are willing to hold a private contractor like Tony Fitzsimmons accountable, despite that he technically has no obligation to military ethics and conduct. Based on these implications, I have a hard time buying that the military either can't or shouldn't be bothered emphasizing for male troops to behave appropriately and professionally.
I'd considered joining the military myself at one point, and it was during my junior year of high school when we had 2 Green Berets visit to do a presentation for those of us who were interested. It was early 2003, and the U.S. military was right on the verge of entering Iraq. And the visitors explained that as of that time, the role of special forces was still only offered to men. One of them argued that it was impractical and unnecessary to open the position to women, and the reason countries like Israel allowed women in combat was because the country's dramatically lower population demanded it. So I guess it's kind of a culture shock for me because it seems like yesterday when the consensus seemed to be anything ranging from the idea that women weren't tough enough to the idea that the men would be more protective of the women than they are of each other, which is contradictory to the harassment argument.
From what I've gathered, the logic seems to be that the women get shot at too, so keeping women who can make the cut barred looks to be a moot point. Despite that women can be just as vulnerable in the field as men, they are denied combat recognition, which is essential to promotion. On that note, I'd like to think that this ends up being the best possible accommodation for our military. They are, after all, the ones with the greatest stake in the matter.
Thanks for watching, and to any service members who might see this, thank you for your service. My greatest hope on the matter is that for you of all people, this proves to be an effective and positive arrangement.